First, Joseph Phillips for the motion.
Oh, boy. Feel like I did before my first love scene with Halle Berry. So you can imagine, if you have any imagination at all, the butterflies and actually the excitement. Because I'm here in defense of what I think is one of the cornerstones of our republic, that of non-discrimination. And I think it was articulated in Brown versus the Board of Education when it decided that discrimination in our public schools was unconstitutional. It became part of our cultural lexicon a few years later when Presidents Kennedy and Johnson issued an executive order that stated clearly and unambiguously that affirmative action should be taken to ensure that hiring decisions were made without regard to race. And then, of course, it was given teeth in the law through the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was very clear that discrimination based on race was unlawful. And to quote an 80s sitcom, it's a different world from where you come from. That was then. That was good old-fashioned non-discrimination, and it was good for America. Well, times have changed, and what we're talking about now, affirmative action, is no longer about non-discrimination. It's about racial preferences, and that is what we oppose, racial preferences. Now, that doesn't mean that we believe that racism has suddenly disappeared. It hasn't. We know that racism exists. Listen, I'm 45 years old. I've been black in America for a long time. I have seen racism. I have been the victim of racism. I'm not about to stand up here and pretend that it doesn't exist. But the question before us is not, does racism exist? The question is, are racial preferences an effective means to combat racism? And the answer is simply no. There isn't any evidence at all that racial preferences actually benefits us in terms of our race relations. In fact, what evidence there is points to just the opposite. What we do know is that racial preferences tend to enhance and firm up negative stereotypes, particularly as it pertains to black intellectual capacity and academic capabilities. You know, there was a saying that my mother had, and I hear it in my head right now. There is no monopoly on brain power. That's what my mother said all the time. There is no monopoly on brain power. Black people can compete. We can compete on the athletic fields. We can compete in the symphony halls, and we can compete in the classrooms. And what's more, my mother said, you can compete and you will compete. But there are some folks who, sadly, are going to tell my children something very different. And you don't have to take my word for it. Let's just look at what they say. Richard Atkinson, former president of the University of California at Berkeley, standing before an audience similar to this at University of San Diego, said that it was highly doubtful, if not impossible, that we would achieve diversity on our nation's premier campuses without the use of racial preferences. Now, Atkinson was not standing before a curious world telling everybody he's just a big fat racist, and unless you rein me in, I'm going to start discriminating right and left. No. What he was saying is that there is a monopoly on brain power, and that black students don't have it in sufficient quantity to show up in significant numbers on our nation's campuses. Now, if you're not sufficiently offended, as you should be, let's take something else that you often hear in discussions like this. Someone, maybe here, over here, is bound to stand up and say, well, I benefited from affirmative action. You benefited from affirmative action. She benefited from affirmative action. And of course, they're not saying, well, you benefited from non-discrimination. Well, I did, and that's a good thing. What they're saying is, I couldn't qualify, you couldn't qualify, she couldn't qualify. Absurd. Ms. Kimberlé Crenshaw there. I've met her for the first time. I've read what she's written. I've heard her on the radio. This is a smart, dynamic woman. The idea that but for racial preferences, Ms. Crenshaw would be standing on a corner singing doo-wop someplace is offensive to me, and it should be offensive to all in the sound of my voice. Now, you're going to hear a lot of statistics today. I'm not going to talk to you about statistics. I'm going to talk to you about people, because racial preferences impact and affect people. This past April, spring, my wife was at a birthday party with our children. And the mothers are sitting there talking. If the father's in there, you know that you tend to avoid these things like the plague, so I wasn't there. But the mothers are grouped, and they're talking about their children, where they go to school, and it comes to light that my oldest boy attends a magnet program for highly gifted students. Without missing a beat, one of the other mothers says, well, you know, now with this Supreme Court decision, they won't be able to accept kids in these programs for diversity. Well, my wife was kinder than I would have been. After she picked her jaw up off the floor, she explained to the woman, look, he's not in this program because he checked some box. You can't get in this program unless you score 99.9% on the test. Let me repeat that, 99.9% on the test. And he's making straight A's in this program. And what is more ironic is that the woman she was talking to is a teacher in the Los Angeles Unified School District. That is the evil of racial preferences. That is the real-life impact of racial preferences. Teachers who lack faith in the academic abilities of their students, and children who, no matter how hard they work, no matter how broad their gifts, are stained with preference, with beneficence. That's Greek.
One.
And my child is not the only one. There are thousands and thousands of students just like him who cannot enter our nation's college campuses boldly and confidently. They enter, again, dripping with the stigma of racial preferences. And I'm here to tell you tonight that that is not good for America. Thank you.